In the heart of Manhattan, high above the crowded streets and glowing billboards, stood a glass-walled penthouse, a palace in the sky. Inside, beneath soft golden chandeliers and velvet drapes, a young woman gazed out at the city that never sleeps. Her name was Charlotte Hayes, 26 years old, the only daughter of the late Richard and Elizabeth Hayes, real estate tycoons who had once ruled New York's skyline. Dressed in a flowing silk gown, her blonde hair shimmering under the warm light, Charlotte looked like the very picture of wealth and beauty. Yet, as she stood before the enormous window, staring at the endless sea of city lights, her eyes told another story. They were tired. Lonely, broken. Charlotte had inherited everything. The billion-dollar company, the lavish estates, the kind of luxury most people could only dream of. But inside, she carried an emptiness that all the money in the world could not fill. It was a night like any other, or at least, it began that way. The sound of glasses clinking and faint laughter echoed from the living room where Charlotte's fiancé, Daniel, entertained business associates. He was tall, handsome, charming, the kind of man who looked perfect on paper, but perfection has its cracks. Charlotte had gone upstairs to fetch something from her room when she heard his voice through the slightly open office door. At first, she thought he was closing another deal, but the words that spilled into the hallway shattered her world. "Relax, baby," Daniel chuckled into his phone. "Once I get the money from Charlotte, I'll be done. You and I will be married soon." She'd never see it coming. The glass Charlotte held in her hand slipped, crashing onto the wooden floor. Her heart pounded as if the walls around her had caved in. So it was true. Another man who didn't love her, only her fortune. That night, Charlotte didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her king-sized bed, staring at the diamond engagement ring that now felt like a cruel joke. Memories of past relationships flooded her mind. The fake smiles, the sweet promises, the endless betrayals. Every man who had claimed to love her had only loved the weight of her bank account. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered into the darkness, "I can't do this anymore." Slowly, she removed her jewelry, the necklace, the bracelet, the ring, and placed them neatly into a velvet box. Then she reached for a plain backpack. Into it, she packed simple clothes, a pair of sunglasses, and a white cane she had once kept as a theater prop. By dawn, Charlotte Hayes, the billionaire heiress, was gone. She wasn't leaving as herself. She was leaving as someone new, someone invisible. 2 days later, a Greyhound bus rumbled into a quiet town in Ohio. Unlike New York, there were no skyscrapers here, no flashing billboards, just small diners, grocery stores, and friendly porches with rocking chairs. When the bus doors hissed open, Charlotte stepped out. Gone was the glamorous heiress in silk. Instead, a young woman in an oversized hoodie, ripped jeans, dark sunglasses, and a white cane carefully made her way down the steps. She had chosen this place because no one knew her here. To them, she would be just another stranger. Another face lost in the crowd. Or so she thought. Charlotte settled on the sidewalk near a small diner, her cane resting beside her. For the first time in her life, she stretched out her hand for help. People passed. Some muttered under their breath. Others glanced with pity and kept walking. Most didn't look at all. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The neon sign of the diner buzzed faintly, glowing against the coming night. Charlotte's stomach growled, but she didn't move. This was her test, to see if anyone could look past her disguise and see her as a human being, not as a paycheck. That evening, a man named Ethan Miller walked down the street. He was 28, dressed in a plaid shirt and worn jeans, carrying a bag of groceries. His life was simple. He ran a small corner store just a few blocks away, struggling to make ends meet, but never losing his kind heart. As he walked past the diner, his eyes fell on Charlotte. Something about the way she sat there, so still, so alone, tugged at him. He took a few more steps, then stopped. His conscience wouldn't let him leave. Slowly, he turned back. Crouching down in front of her, his voice gentle, he said, "Hey, are you okay?" Charlotte hesitated, remembering her role. With a soft, shaky voice, she whispered, "My name is Charlotte. I lost my sight years ago. I have no one." Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't have much himself, but he couldn't walk away. Reaching into his pocket, Ethan pulled out a few dollar bills, all he could spare that day. He held them out to her. "It's not much," he said softly, "but maybe you can get something to eat." Behind her sunglasses, Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. She had lived surrounded by million-dollar deals and billion-dollar men. Yet none had ever offered her the simple kindness of a stranger's last few dollars. Her voice trembled as she whispered, thank you so much." Ethan nodded, stood up, and took a few steps away. But something made him stop again. He looked back at the young woman on the sidewalk, her frail figure outlined by the diner's neon glow. And in that moment, his heart told him he couldn't just leave her there. The night had grown quiet. The streets of the small Ohio town were empty, except for the flickering street lamps. Ethan stood outside his modest grocery shop, phone pressed to his ear, his other hand rubbing his forehead as if the weight of the world pressed down on him. "Emma," he said softly, trying to keep his voice steady, "I met someone today. She needs help. She has no family, no home. She's blind." There was silence on the other end for a moment, before a gentle sigh came. Emma had always been cautious, always careful. "Ethan," she replied, "you can't just bring strangers into your life. You barely have enough to take care of yourself. What if she's dangerous? What if she's not who she says she is?" Ethan looked down the street where Charlotte still sat near the diner, shivering slightly under the cool night air. His heart clenched. "She's not dangerous, Emma. She's lost. Just trust me on this." The next evening, Ethan knocked on his younger sister's apartment door. Emma opened it, dressed in her nurse scrubs, her brown hair pulled back into a ponytail. Her eyes immediately fell on Charlotte, standing uncertainly behind him with her. "Kane." Emma's brows furrowed. "This is her?" she asked, her voice skeptical. "Yes," Ethan answered, his tone firm but gentle. "Emma, she has nowhere else to go. Just let her stay here for a while, until we figure something out." Emma crossed her arms, studying Charlotte. The oversized hoodie, the dark glasses, a fragile posture. Everything about her screamed mystery, and Emma didn't like mysteries. Finally, Emma stepped aside with a resigned sigh. "Fine, but only because of you, Ethan. Don't make me regret this." Charlotte lowered her head. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with genuine gratitude. That night, the three of them sat at a small wooden table in Emma's modest kitchen. The meal was simple: macaroni and cheese, a small bowl of salad, and water in mismatched cups. Charlotte sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, listening to the sound of Ethan's laughter as he tried to ease the tension. Emma remained cautious, stealing glances at their guest, as if waiting for the mask to fall and the truth to be revealed. For Charlotte, every bite felt heavier than gold. She had dined on caviar, truffle, and champagne, but never had food tasted so honest, so pure. Her heart whispered, "This is what family feels like." Days turned into weeks. Life in the small town was slow but steady. Charlotte began helping with small chores despite her disguise as a blind woman. One afternoon, Ethan guided her hands as she clumsily tried to chop vegetables. "Careful," he said with a chuckle. "You don't want to lose a finger?" Charlotte laughed, the sound genuine, surprising even herself. It had been years since she had laughed without pretending. They planted flowers outside the apartment. They shared stories around the table. They laughed at little things that money could never buy. And for the first time in her life, Charlotte felt like she belonged somewhere. But while Charlotte found comfort, Ethan carried a growing storm in his heart. Late at night, he lay on his small bed, staring at the cracked ceiling above him. On his nightstand sat a faded photograph of his late parents and a worn-out Bible. His mind was filled with questions. Who was Charlotte, really? Why had fate brought her into his life? And why did he, a simple man with nothing, feel so drawn to her? He whispered into the silence, "Lord, I don't know what to do, but I can't let her suffer." A week later, Ethan sat at the small wooden kitchen table, an old piece of paper in his hands, the deed to a small plot of land that had belonged to his parents. It was his last remaining inheritance, his one chance to build a better future. But now he thought of Charlotte, the woman who needed more than he did. His hands trembled as he considered selling it to provide for her, to give her stability, even if it meant giving up his own dreams. His eyes welled with tears. If this is what it takes, then so be it. That night, as Ethan spoke softly to Emma about his plan, Charlotte stood silently in the doorway. She clutched her white cane, her body shaking. Through the shadows, tears streamed down her face. She had lived her whole life surrounded by people who wanted to take from her. But here was a man willing to give up everything he had. For her. Her heart broke under the weight of the truth. She whispered to herself, almost inaudible, "What have I done? How long can I lie to him?" The walls of her disguise were closing in, and she knew the time was coming when she could no longer pretend. The rain tapped gently against the windows of Emma's apartment. The air inside was heavy with unspoken truths. Charlotte stood in the middle of the small living room, her heart pounding. She could no longer carry the weight of her lie. Her hands trembled as she reached up and slowly removed her sunglasses. The white cane slipped from her grasp and fell onto the floor with a hollow sound. Her blue eyes, no longer hidden, brimmed with tears. She looked directly at Ethan, who sat across from her, confused. "I'm not blind," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never was." The room fell into silence. Emma froze in disbelief, and Ethan rose to his feet, his face pale. Sobbed, "I was running away. From my life, from people who only wanted my money. I thought if I lived like this, if I hid who I was, maybe someone would love me for me, not for my wealth." Ethan staggered back a step, as if the floor had crumbled beneath him. "You lied to me? To Emma? To everyone?" Charlotte nodded, unable to stop the tears streaming down her cheeks. "I never meant to hurt you. I only wanted to know what it felt like to be seen as a person, not a fortune." But Ethan's heart, already scarred by years of struggle, felt betrayed. The storm outside grew louder, thunder echoing in the distance. Ethan grabbed his jacket, his jaw clenched tight, his eyes filled with hurt. Without another word, he opened the door and stepped into the pouring rain. Charlotte cried out after him, "Please, wait." "Ethan." But he kept walking, the rain soaking his clothes as he disappeared into the night. Streetlights blurred through the curtain of water. Each step he took was heavy, as if he were walking away from not just her, but from the fragile hope that had blossomed in his heart. Inside the apartment, Charlotte collapsed to her knees, her sobs echoing through the room. Emma rushed to her side, wrapping an arm around her. "Charlotte," Emma said softly, "you should have told him. He's not like the others. He deserved the truth." Charlotte clutched Emma's hand, whispering, "I know. And now I've lost him." Later that night, The rain softened, but Charlotte's pain did not. She sat on the couch, her face buried in her hands. Emma sat beside her, speaking gently. You have to understand, Ethan's been through so much. He's lost more than most people ever will. All he has left is his honesty. That's why your lie cut him so deeply. Charlotte lifted her tear-streaked face. Do you think he'll ever forgive me? Emma paused, then nodded slowly. Ethan has a good heart. If your feelings for him are real, then you need to prove it. Not with money, not with gifts, with your truth. Charlotte took a deep, shaky breath. Then that's what I'll do. I won't give up on him. 2 days later, Charlotte found Ethan near the old grocery store. He looked exhausted, his eyes heavy, his clothes wrinkled. She approached him, her steps uncertain, her heart in her throat. When she stood before him, she dropped to her knees on the wet ground, ignoring the dirt and the curious stares of passers-by. Ethan, she cried, tears running down her face, I'm begging you. Please forgive me. I never meant to hurt you. I only wanted to escape a world where no one ever loved me for who I am. But you showed me kindness when I had nothing to give back. That kindness changed me. Ethan's arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. You deceived me. You let me think you were helpless, when all along you weren't. Charlotte looked up at him, her voice trembling. You're right, and I'll live with that guilt forever. But please, don't think for a second that what I feel for you isn't real. For the first time in my life, I know what love is. And it's because of you. Her words hung in the air like a prayer. Silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. Ethan looked down at Charlotte, at her tears, at the raw honesty shining in her eyes. His heart fought against his mind, but love is not something that reason can silence. Slowly, he knelt down in front of her and took her trembling hands into his. Charlotte, he said quietly, you hurt me. But I can't deny what we shared. You're right. I saw you as a person, not as wealth. And maybe that's why this hurts so much. Charlotte held his hands tighter, her sobs softening. I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that I can be honest. Please just give me that chance. Behind them, Emma watched from a distance, her lips curling into the faintest smile. Finally, Ethan nodded, pulling Charlotte into his arms. The golden light of sunset broke through the clouds, bathing them in warmth. Months later, the city skyline stretched out beneath the fading sun. On a rooftop garden in New York, Charlotte stood in an elegant dress, her blonde hair shining in the golden light. Beside her was Ethan, dressed simply but standing tall, proud, and strong. Emma joined them, laughing as she took in the view. For the first time, all three of them felt like family. Charlotte leaned against Ethan's shoulder, whispering, I used to think happiness was measured in diamonds and mansions. But now I know. It's measured in love and trust in the people who stay when everyone else walks away. Ethan smiled, his hand closing gently around hers. Then let's never let go. The city below glowed like a sea of stars, but the brightest light shone between them. A love born not from wealth, but from truth. And as the night embraced the city, their story was no longer one of lies or disguises. It was a story of forgiveness, of redemption, and of a new beginning.